All right, so I'd like to say thank you to everyone joining us, both in person and online, for today's Richard's Safe Workplace Lecture Series lecture. Our presenter today is Dr. Ryan Olson, who comes from Oregon, and I am going to read all of his accolades because I don't have them dedicated to memory. So Ryan is a professor at Oregon Institute for Occupational Health Sciences and also a professor at the Oregon Health Sciences School of Public Health. He co-directs the Oregon Healthy Workforce Center there at the Oregon Institute for Occupational Health Sciences, and is also a multiple principal investigator in the Oregon Occupational Public Health Program. He joined the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences as a faculty member in 2005, and his research really covers a broad spectrum of areas. He specializes in occupational fatality surveillance and prevention, as well as safety, health, and well-being interventions for isolated workers in demanding occupations, so things like commercial truck drivers and home health care workers. Areas of contribution to science includes an effective total worker health interventions for those isolated populations, behavioral self-monitoring applied to workplace behavior change and transfer of training, self-assessment of ergonomic and safety exposures, and both environmental and social motivational variables. He's a member of the editorial board for the Journal of Organizational Behavioral Management and a charter member of the Society of Occupational Health Psychology and past president of the Organizational Behavior Management Network. So please take a second to thank Dr. Olson for being here and give him an appropriate Mike welcome.
Thank you, Matt. Dr. Thies. So I found the Rocky Mountain Center years ago when I learned that this group out here was also doing commercial driver research. I think there were like 10 people in the United States, or 10 groups about that, doing it at the time. And over the years I've learned that that is so for a reason. Commercial drivers are very challenging to study. You kind of end up living the life of a trucker or a bus operator to find them, work with them, collect data from them. So I'm going to share some research with two occupational driving groups today. Maybe in a future visit I could talk about some of the other work I do, but that's the focus for today. So this is Kurt Lewin, considered a parent of social psychology, and Kurt Lewin wrote, if you want to truly understand something, try to change it. Changing things is hard. I think it's also, you may come to an understanding of how things work, but it's also a recipe for becoming frustrated, puzzled, worn out. Trying to change things is very difficult, but the challenge of trying to create change means getting a depth of understanding over your population of focus, how they work, when they work, their culture, you really need to get a deep dive into the occupation to try and understand and change their exposures or their well-being. And I put this slide up because I spent most of my career doing intervention research. I like to, what it ends up meaning is that I spend most of my time convincing companies and labor unions to do things for free in order to try out interventions and evaluate whether or not they're effective. So a huge part of my job is logistic, and I joke with others that my publications output matches that sort of workspace. If you know the artist Vermeer, it's a lot of work for hopefully one little jewel at the end that's your key intervention outcomes paper. And then maybe you get a few other papers about other interesting things with your data sets. But the data sets are really little treasures because they're hard to come by, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into making them happen. So as Matt mentioned, I co-direct the Oregon Healthy Workforce Center. By nature of me being involved in Kent, Anger, and others, we have focused on interventions, but our current cycle includes more physiological, mechanistic, how is shift work impacting physiology, circadian rhythms, and well-being, and also tools to help advance and evaluate future interventions. So Emily Huang is developing a total worker health climate scale, which is 3 integrated scales: safety climate, physical health climate, and well-being climate. So super interesting tool. If she succeeds, it'll be a 12-question scale to assess total worker health climate, which is the shared perceptions about the priority of safety, health, and well-being at a workplace. Next up, a little bit of a highlight of my lab. Matt's already mentioned the themes. This is my home care project, which is the newest. The pilot study starts next week. It is a supportive group intervention for home care workers. We're doing in a web-based format, so workers from anywhere in the Northwest can participate, really anywhere, but we're focusing on the Northwest. My collaborator is a clinical psychologist who specializes in cognitive behavioral strategies for pain self-management. And this project, if you attend Work, Stress, and Health this fall, you might get a chance to hear pilot results, or next time I'm passing through town, we can talk about it. But I'm very excited about it. I was worried about getting into the pain management space, but because it seemed like an intractable, terrible, difficult problem. But there is great potential for these cognitive behavioral strategies to be integrated with safety protections for home care workers to prevent the progression of chronic pain to developing into work-related disability or even opioid initiation, use, and misuse. So that is Compass, and that is for the future. So starting with exposures for commercial truck drivers, I'm going to talk about team truck drivers and new bus operators today. So teams are drivers where one driver sleeps while the other one's driving. So you can imagine they're pretty much working or sleeping in the truck all the time with very limited time not in the truck. But for commercial drivers in general, here's a list of exposures. And some of them you can imagine not ever having been in a truck or on a ride-along, right? You see the trucks out on the road all the time, but they can work up to 14 hours a day, 70, 80 hours in a 7 to 8 day period. Night driving all around the clock, but especially for teams. Being in a large truck, your body's vibrated in a way that's different than a passenger vehicle, dramatically higher exposures to whole body vibration. Drivers are their own boss in a sense, but they're totally not their own boss. Unless you're an owner-operator, you are being told where to go and when and when you have to be there. And the schedule is usually going to be tight as soon as possible. The sleep environment, it can be noisy, hot, cold, in the team driver's case, vibrating, bouncing around, jostling. Drivers who use CPAP for sleep apnea may have struggles ongoing with the auxiliary power unit, whether or not it's sufficient to keep up with their usage of that machine. And then you're away from home all the time, and so there's great potential for work and family strain or conflict. So a lot of stuff going on. Many people do this job. It was over 3.5 million the last time I checked in the US, but if you bought something at the store, like 70% of the time it was on a truck at some point. So older data, but good data. That's from Washington, essentially sharing that the injury rates in commercial trucking are double, triple, or quadruple that of all industries. This is, I keep waiting for these data to stabilize, but it gets worse every time we look at it. This is over 10 years ago, but this is the general U.S. population, 31% obese. Commercial trucking is the mirror image of this in the wrong direction. So this is the best representative U.S. Trucking sample that we have, and I like to say that the actions are in the interactions. So an injured worker who is also obese will experience 80% more lost work time and 80% greater costs. And Dr. Thies has done research that the Framingham heart disease risk calculator is associated with crash risk. obesity and associated health conditions are associated with increased crash risk. If you have sleep apnea that's untreated, it's 5 times the risk of a serious crash. And when a large truck is in a crash, they are more likely to be fatal, like 9 times more likely to kill someone. And they cost many, many millions of dollars, over $7 million the last time I checked. So these are kind of a health behavior profile data set from a study we did with mostly solo truck drivers. The average body mass index was up in the class 2 obese range. Only 50% or less were meeting standards for healthy or sufficient sleep for an occupation that we want to be rested and not fatigued. That is concerning. Less than a quarter met criteria for being physically active, and I have actigraphy data that tell you it's probably much worse than that. This is self-report. And then fruits and veggie servings are super low. The American population is not great, but less than 10% were having 5 or more fruits or veggies a day. The sugary drinks and snacks avoidance, we made up the criteria. We just said you had to avoid it most days each week. So we're all red and yellow, no greens here basically. I was going to color it green if they were over 70%. So physical activity actigraphy. So we put these little devices on a belt and drivers wear it for a week. The truck's vibrating, and we've shown that the truck will add steps or energy expenditure. So we look at 10 minutes of continuous moderate intensity physical activity. So for the whole sample, the weekly time in activity bouts was 14 minutes. For the active group, it was 44 minutes. The recommended level for health benefits is 150 minutes per week. And not all at once, spread across the weekdays. We have additional data that show when truck drivers are exercising. And we were expecting all sorts of weird times of the day, like maybe it's early morning, maybe it's lunch. It's kind of middle of the week, dinner time is the prevalent time for these bouts. So if we want to encourage or increase physical activity, it's that kind of post-shift time window for a day shift driver. So this is the significant difference between the more and less active, I should say inactive truck drivers, lower weight and less tenure in the active group, which maybe over time the job wears you down. So the greater your tenure, the less likely it is you're going to keep up with physical activity. So this is a quote from a team driver. Once you start sleeping in a moving truck, it's a whole different. When I first started, I didn't think I'd ever get it. Between being a different time of sleeping for me and bouncing around in the bed, it was like, there's no way people do this. As a team driver in training. And I'll tell you, working with teams was different than solo drivers. I felt like I could see it in their physical appearance, the toll of the job, the fatigue, the tiredness. They seemed a little pale. It felt different because they're, by definition, somebody is doing the night shift or a swing shift or an early morning shift because their partner gets the day shift. And they float, they flip-flop, they do all sorts of different shift work arrangements. This is probably the best study of the truck sleeper berth ever. The technology to study sleeping in the trucks is not available anymore. They used eye movements and head position to get around the vibrating truck issue. But awakenings were twice as much for the teams home versus over the road. And the authors noted that this is probably vibrations, waking drivers up and then having trouble getting back to sleep. Interesting, as we've dug, I've talked with sleep researchers about teams because we were trying to figure out how to do sleep actigraphy. And one after another, they're like, oh, the team's data is terrible. We just ignore it. We set it aside and we just look at the solo drivers. But we think we figured out a way to, with the right device, to get reasonably good actigraphy sleep data for drivers. So this is a sleep actigram for a team driver. And this is a kind of a flip-flop pattern. So they're not continuously sleeping during these blue rest intervals, but you can see going to bed in the evening around 1800 hours to start with. Then the next day they're going to sleep at noon for about 5 days. And then they go backward a bit, and then they're back sleeping for part of the night the day after that. We've also seen a pattern where the drivers move by 2 hours a day. So by the end of they start going to bed at 9 in the morning, and then they're going to bed at 9 at night within a week. And the body clock is only capable of shifting 2 hours a day if you are rigorously controlling light exposure, physical activity, all the things that control the body clock. Okay, so that's the background. And some might say, well, that sounds daunting, why try? And it can feel a little frustrating because the federal hours of service regulations drive the limits to which these workers are worked to. And if you talk to Rich Hanowski, who's been involved with research supporting hours of service regulation changes, it's like decade plus to get a change to happen, and then it'll be challenged. And so an employer can choose to do something different than work people right up to the boundaries of legal limits, but that's a very enlightened employer, and the economics of trucking make that difficult because profit margins are really tight. But I met an engineer who worked for an original equipment manufacturer, and I was talking with him about the truck cab, and he talked with me about all the components, and if you change this part of the paneling, it's going to cost you this $100,000 to change the assembly line, and if you do this, like what's feasible and what's not. And after talking with him, we decided that there are some cab features you could probably improve with a research budget from NIOSH, just saying something. And then I specialize in behavioral interventions, and that engineer introduced me to Pete Johnson, and we designed the Tech for Us study. So this is focused on advancing the sleep vigor and well-being of driving teams, and the final paper is currently under review. This truck, interestingly, was from my first ride-along with a truck driver who started me off at midnight. We drove till 6 a.m., we stopped for a nap, and we got up and kept driving. My sleep was screwed up immediately. But this is at a vineyard in California, and after the trip, I got back to Portland and noticed that the grapes I bought at Fred Meyer were from this, like labeled from this place. It was pretty cool. So the picture turned out, so I still use it in slides. So Pete and I applied the hierarchy of controls to our decision making, wanting to emphasize conditions first and then supplement that with behavioral interventions and then see what they do alone and combined. This mattress the engineer told us about, they did a little pilot with teams in Portland. It has a really unusual suspension, interlocking foam of different densities, and the team drivers really liked it, so we thought let's study it scientifically. And then the active suspension seat was invented by Bose, the company that invented the noise-canceling earphones. And it detects vibrations from the ground and then actively counteracts them. And it reduces whole body vibration by like half, 30% to 50%. So it's by far the best thing out there. What's happening now are partial active suspension seats are a little more affordable and probably will be the way companies start to invest in this. But Pete found that this seat also reduced fatigue. So whole body vibrations can produce musculoskeletal problems, but it's also fatiguing to be bounced around for 11 hours a day. I drive for 6 hours and I'm done. And they do 11 hours and then 10 hours and then 10 hours and 11 and maybe 8, day after day. So the behavioral program was modeled on a physical activity-based program for people with insomnia. Truck drivers don't necessarily have insomnia. They probably have shift work sleep disorder, especially teams, because they're trying to sleep in the day when their body says it's time to be alert and awake. But it was a physical activity challenge, focused on weekly walking minutes and then sleep hygiene practices. And it was built upon our mobile health intervention platform that we used for body weight management with truck drivers. So they set goals, weekly walking minutes, individual and team, which sleep hygiene practices they wanted to work on. They had online training in sleep and fatigue management and why physical activity relates to sleep. Walking just 6 blocks a day reduces your risk for sleep problems by 50%. So exercise is tremendously sleep protective. So we needed a topic to argue that point. And then they could talk with a health coach about their sleep goals and physical activity goals as well. They got group and individual feedback. A deeper description is available in our papers. So pilot design, I know this is busy, but the take-home point is mattress test first. Nobody had looked at this mattress before, so we wanted to see it alone. We counterbalanced the order of introduction, and then we added the seat and behavioral program afterward. 2 companies, 4 teams from each company. And then the randomized trial was cab enhancements first, seat and mattress, and cab enhancements plus behavioral program. We randomized by team, enrolled 49 at baseline, 32 completed the full protocol. Our target sample size was 80. So we enrolled, I think it was 62% of the planned sample. I meant to mention this at the outset, but this was during the pandemic. So I could spend a whole talk on that part of both of these projects. I had staff who spent 5 weeks continuously out of state. They drove to that state because flying was not permitted. We had to get university exceptions to do research in the community. Trucking was as busy as ever, and the truck drivers were overworked. The first wave of data collection was during, if you don't know this, back to school at the end of the summer, and the holiday season are the truck drivers' busiest times of year. So from August to December, they're slammed, and that was when we did our first wave of recruitment during the pandemic. So I'm proud of those 49 drivers, but it was not our full planned sample. So primary outcomes were focused on sleep and fatigue. Sleep scoring is still in process. It's time intensive. Our analysts put together a visualization in R where we can see their logbook, their sleep diary, their actigraphy counts, all alongside, and then we have scoring rules for when they went to sleep, when they got up, was it a nap, how long is it to, 4 pages of scoring rules. But in our pilot study, we did complete that analysis. For the trial, we're still in progress. So mostly there are self-report outcomes for the pilot. Secondary outcomes were related to the behavioral intervention and manipulation checks. Did they like the mattress? Did they prefer it? Did vibrations get altered by the mattress? And I'm just going to take a sip of water before I talk about the effects. So Cohen's D, I'm hoping that might have shown up in a stats class. It's basically a standardized mean difference. So it's a difference divided by the standard deviation, either pooled or one of the group's baselines. So what's nice about D is you can look at the magnitude and direction of effects across different metrics. Puts them all in the same sort of ruler, so to speak. So everything trended in the expected directions, and it was larger in the combined intervention stage. And sleep quality had the improved by a standard deviation and a half, which is tremendous. Any effect size 0.8 or higher is considered large. So this is pretty data, just like we predicted. Nice effect sizes. And secondary outcomes were similar except for global health, which didn't change a lot. But physical activity was really responsive, largely because they weren't doing much to begin with. So we went from near zero to something. Dark bars are the therapeutic mattress ratings, strongly preferred across all dimensions. They all chose to keep that mattress. It was kind of unusual. So there's some, as a psychologist, this is the new shiny thing. And I have to say, a new coil spring mattress also benefited sleep quality and duration. So turnover in trucking is very high, sometimes exceeding 100% annually. So trucking companies buy the cheapest mattresses because they're burning through them. Every driver wants a new mattress. They don't want a used one. And so just providing a new coil spring mattress had a benefit, but the therapeutic mattress had a bit more. Vibration, I was introduced to this analysis method. This is called a power spectral density plot, which in layperson's terms is the prevalence of these different vibration frequencies in the measurement time period. And we saw this plot across the two companies and we're like, how can one truck floor be that different from another truck floor? Isn't a truck is a truck is a truck? And then I remembered that at the first company, they were really proud of their fuel efficiency tweaks. And they used something called a super single tire in the back. So instead of two tires, it's one big tire. And they shortened the wheelbase and they got some gain in fuel efficiency. But what they were generating was an excess of these kind of 10 to 19 cycles per second vibrations in the truck, probably right below the sleeper berth. So if those are sleep disruptive, they're gaining fuel efficiency but bouncing people around more. The dark line is a more traditional two-wheel standard wheelbase arrangement. And the seat did reduce the normalized 8-hour exposure to whole body vibration by about 30%. So the mattress power spectral density plots, Pete told me that the overall vibration exposure was not reduced, if anything magnified by the foam mattress, but there was some attenuation of these middle frequency types that were prevalent in that super single arrangement. And then the second company, these low frequency vibrations, which we thought might be the most disruptive, like that's 2 cycles per second, you can imagine kind of waking you up. These vibrations are kind of more like a hum, maybe like a massage chair. Some of the teams say they get used to it and it becomes a little comforting, but anyway, that's the exploratory data on vibrations on the mattress. So it's no magic bullet. Probably what's needed is an active suspension bed platform that counteracts the vibrations to really change the vibration exposure in the sleeper berth. But, the take-home point is a new mattress was really appreciated, preferred. They self-reported better sleep, and actigraphy data were supportive of at least their sleep duration self-report. After I talk about the trial outcomes, I'll pause because then we'll move to another study and we can do questions on this study if people would like. So randomized trial, effect sizes are smaller, but generally in the predicted directions, they're having some benefit in terms of effect size, all not statistically significant. But even though we had 49 drivers and not 80, I would still expect a better replication of the effect sizes we saw in the pilot. So that was a bit of a surprise. And our actigraphy measured bouts per minute was 3 standard deviations larger. So very big effect, but again, it's going from 0 or near 0 to, I can't see my notes. It was a kind of a similar minutes per week as we saw in the other study, like 40 minutes a week, I want to say, or 20, somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes per week from like 2 minutes per week. So, but that's an improvement, not a worsening. So I'll take it. But you can see all the other effects are less than 0.5 and not statistically significant. And we also saw some unexpected statistically significant results. But the table with all the numbers was a little too much to go through here. And I can send a copy of the reviewed paper and review if anyone was super curious about the details. Before I get into my take-home points on the study, anybody burning questions about driving teams or what we saw? Yeah.
What's the average age for the drivers, do you know?
Late 40s, 50. I want to say late 40s in most samples. Your 700 driver study maybe is better, or maybe the Sieber paper is better.
Yeah, it's all generally the same though. I mean, it
Yeah.
is an older population. Teams, I think, are a little bit on the younger side.
I think that's true, but I have to check
But
the
yeah,
paper.
but not.
Yeah, it's not a young workforce.
And then about 100% turnaround every year.
Yes, or more. The team relationship, there was a podcast, I won't say the name of the company out loud, but the podcast will. Some predatory and abusive hiring practices, recruiting team drivers with the promise of we're going to train you with your commercial driver's license, but oh, don't you want to be an owner operator? We'll sign a contract with you to own the truck. But then they're committed to the company, they can only work with that company, and they're paying off a truck, and they don't make any money, and sometimes they owe money. So that our partner seemed like a good actor in the industry, but the team driving arrangement, my understanding is they kind of expect turnover, and new drivers are the least expensive, and so the turnover in teams is kind of par for the course. Like, they have big investments in recruiting, hiring, training, with the expectation that people aren't going to stay with them for a long time, but while they do, they can run the truck almost 24 hours a day. Yeah.
So with that, how do you get these companies to implement anything for the benefit of the driver? I mean, they're expecting a turnaround.
Yeah. Well, they do care about safety, because crashes are scary, costly, dangerous. And it's usually the safety professional who is our champion. So it was the VP of safety who was like super enlightened. Safety is a high priority. We want to do things better. They offer sleep and circadian rhythms training. But the work arrangement, shift work is hard on the body in general. But yeah, there are really inspiring employers out there, but it's usually the safety professional who's like, they have that orientation of I care about these people and I want them to be well. Yeah, in the back, and then Emily.
Is there a preferred team schedule for sleeping? Like you had mentioned that the one slide you showed that had people starting at around 1,800 hours and shifting back. Is it kind of all over the place, or is there kind of like a natural rhythm that people fall into that it's like, you know, for 4 days it's 1,800 midnight?
If you are partnered up with somebody or dating, it's kind of like negotiating with your partner. What's going to work for us? The company we worked with recommended a 3 to 3, so a 12-hour switch, and it's kind of a compromise schedule. It doesn't work perfectly in terms of circadian rhythms, because the circadian folks will tell you that the compromised sleep schedule on weekends for a shift worker is like sleeping from maybe like 2, 3 in the morning to 11 a.m. It keeps the low body temperature in your sleep period. But the company felt that 3 to 3 would keep each driver with some daylight driving, significant daylight driving, and limit their nighttime driving. So it seemed like potentially a good solution. But I do really think the schedules are free to vary quite a lot based on team negotiated preferences, and then whatever their dispatcher will support too. Yeah, great questions. Emily, you had one also?
Yeah, I was just curious, in your conversations with employers and safety professionals, is it ever even on the table to brainstorm, shifting the scheduling or shifting the 24-hour driving? Like, does that even get thrown out there as a pie in the sky possibility to think about, or are even the most enlightened groups taking that off the table entirely?
Yeah, the team arrangement is kind of, there are only a few companies that specialize in it, and it's sort of off the table with teams because that's the point of the arrangement. Is the economic model is high value or perishable freight gets to its destination faster. But I do like that question. I work with sleep researchers, and they sometimes assume that we are a 24-hour society, and I like to ask the question, do we need to be in all cases? You know, because it isn't good for people in general.
Yeah, I was talking to a sleep researcher here recently, and we were talking about possible collaborations, and we ran into an initial, go away and think about it and come back, because there was that, well, I can't change anything about work, and you don't do behavior change. So, like, where's our overlap? And I kept thinking, well, I mean, we could make overlap, right? But you have more experience with this sort of thing, so that's why I was asking too.
Yeah, well, as researchers, we often don't, the employer would have to choose to make a job design change. And we have the fortune right now of Nicole Bowles, through fire departments that were making a shift change, asked her to evaluate it. And so normally we don't have the chance to evaluate a change in shift, but Nicole's getting to do that. They kind of want to do it anyway, but they are really interested. They want to make sure it's not harming health. But yeah, that's the aspiration, is that working conditions, job design changes. And I remember we were talking about Nicholas Krauss over coffee. One of his most elegant recommendations for mass transit operators was pretty much nobody should work full-time driving a bus. If you move to part-time hours, musculoskeletal disorders would reduce by like 30% or something like that. But that would require cross-training, having people operate a vehicle and do something else, not operating a vehicle. And that's complicated. But yeah, great questions to ask. So I should probably move forward, but one more.
No, go for it.
No, we can do it. I got a transition slide.
I was just gonna ask, so where do you see this research going, right? I mean, I think that team driving is, from what I've seen, becoming more popular in some ways, right? So how do you see this being operationalized going forward?
For me personally, I'm interested in the variability of shift work, because I do think dispatchers and companies that's a doable target to make it less variable. And since 2017, something called the Sleep Regularity Index has evolved as being predictive of all sorts of health outcomes. So I'm anticipating my next phase of this, not that study, but my R01 would be focused on regularity of shifts to study its health impacts, because then you could go to employer with something that's doable, like making it more predictable, starting and stopping at the same time, allowing the body to become entrained. So that's kind of where I'm headed personally. Yeah. Okay, so there's a paper called 50 Years of Epidemiological Research with Bus Operators, and these authors were quoted that there's a remarkable distinction between the impressive number of studies that demonstrate adverse health effects of bus drivers' occupation and the small amount of documented prevention intervention projects. Interventions are hard to do, and transit, oh my gosh, if anything's run on a schedule. A union member told me when I met him, he said, my shift doesn't start at 3:30, it starts at 3:13, and when I say 3:13, if I'm 1 second past 3:13, I'm written up for a oversleep, and it goes into, and he said there isn't 5 kinds of shifts, there's a different shift for every single driver, because they're all starting at a slightly different time, and it's not exactly true. We're categorizing shifts into about 5 types, but at any rate, there's a lot of evidence that this job is not good for people. However, there are positive deviants who the job works for and it's a fit with them, and they've learned to live a healthy, happy, fulfilling life in operating a bus. And this study, we're not changing working conditions, but we are focused on brand new people entering the occupation. I was inspired a little bit by Dee Eddington's work at the University of Michigan. He wrote a book called Zero Trends, and he said the best thing any employer can do is keep healthy people healthy, if that's your biggest return on investment. And then the other investments are to reduce the risk level for all other employees. So we were hoping, with focusing on new commercial drivers, to change their health trajectory from, if that's getting worse, that it's less worse or flat out of the gate. And we responded in this NHLBI funded work is focused on body weight management and heart disease risk. So we focused on weight gain, which is legendary in the business. Drivers talk about, I gained 20 pounds, or everybody gains 20 pounds, like the freshman 15. But the freshman 15 at college turns out to be the freshman 5. It's real, but it's not as big as the stories say. And I think I'm going to skip these exposures because we've had a chance to talk about some of them and talk about the preliminary data. 2/3, this is objective medical certificate data from DOT physicals. 2/3 gained weight, and of those who gained, the average was about 12 pounds, so a freshman 12. But the average is lower because some people lost weight and some people stayed the same. So the job didn't disrupt the health for some people. In a retrospective survey study published, the average retrospective, this is what I gained when I started the job, was about 7.5 pounds, which is a unit of body mass index and a pretty big health setback if it happens to you. Call out to Andrew McHill, who I've been collaborating with. I'm a mentor for his K Award. He's a circadian physiologist and focuses on the cardiometabolic consequences of shift work, and he's particularly interested in the timing of eating and has a bunch of data related to a calorie not just being a calorie. It's different if you eat it after your biological night starts. So we have drivers who come up to OHSU and they do a dim light in-lab salivary sample collection to get their dim light melatonin onset, which is biological night marker. We get body composition, a bunch of other measures, and then Andrew measures drivers at baseline 30 days, 90 days with ambulatory blood pressure, actigraphy, and this meal logger app that is examined by nutritionists, which is super cool. He had one operator that kept sending in pictures of handfuls of gummy bears, and he had to say, this looks like a snack, is this really all you're eating? And this person was almost living on gummy bears. This is a little bit more varied, looks maybe like a college diet for me. But there's some veggies down there. So they have to put an object in so the nutritionist can determine the size of the servings. So just a little nugget of discovery from Andrew's work in our collaboration. And the collaboration came out of a journal club, little pitch for the value of journal clubs. We read a paper together, and I said, hey, this new bus driver thing is a natural experiment. You're studying, like I just desperately wanted, I want to know how the meals change when bus operators start. So ambulatory blood pressure, I did not know until I worked with Andrew that at night our blood pressure dips by 10% or more if we're healthy. And non-dipping is predictive of cardiovascular risk. So in the 90-day study, we studied drivers with highly variable earlier morning shift work and those who had a more typical day shift schedule. And blood pressure dipping stayed pretty stable, but at 90 days, it went away for the majority of those variable early morning shift workers. We have data on the meal logger and timing of meals related to circadian night, but not enough time for this seminar that I could share with you all after if you're curious. Okay, so new operators. A colleague of mine, super experienced basic scientist when I started at my job in Oregon, said, Ryan, you can study whatever you want as long as it's fundable. And so there's a kind of a balance played with these grant applications of what's feasible, doable, and what will advance knowledge for the benefit of workers. And after working with truck drivers who were late 40s, 50s, helping them try to lose weight, we really helped obese drivers, and Matt's worked in this area. Obese drivers became a little bit less obese. You know, we weren't radically altering their body composition. We thought this primary prevention for new commercial drivers was the way to go. And so this is the second generation of our commercial driver body weight management work. It really is a behavioral program embedded in new employee socialization. And I feel like it's the employer's responsibility if hazards are poorly controlled or not controllable to inform new employees of those hazards. And in commercial driving, the obesogenic environment is a hazard that is very hard to control. So workers need to be informed of this and supported in taking advantage of workplace supports to avoid having this disrupt their health. So being new is stressful. I don't know how many might be new students out there or new to Salt Lake. It's inherently stressful to learn new things, navigate a new environment, learn a new job, but it's also a new opportunity. And I'm an occupational health psychologist with specialized training in behavioral psychology. I see a new job as a chance to start fresh. You're forming new habits, your ways of working, how your life fits in with your work, including how you eat, how you exercise, how you relate to people. And so there's great opportunity, but there also is great stress. And I work, Talia Bauer, who's our new employee specialist, has studied this for decades, what helps new people succeed. And so our program is really integrating health, body weight management with being a successful new person based on Talia's research. And I mentioned D. Eddington. This is really can we do a little bit early that has long-lasting benefits? So like most of my work, we always pilot and then scale up to do a trial. The pilot was small, but did have a control and intervention site, and then the trial is 6 agencies. So the enhanced onboarding program is a combination of in-person training, each training being followed by an online mobile challenge. The group training is informed by a motivational interviewing approach to try and help people explore what it is they want to do, set goals, and to develop intrinsic motivation to make changes of value to those individual people. So it's 10 hours of in-person training spread over the first year plus all the online work, but we're trying to keep people engaged for 9 months plus, which has felt exhausting at times, but each challenge has a little bit different theme, and there is an arc to their journey as new people. The 90-day training session is like honeymoon's over, stressed out, they've got war stories, naked people walking out in front of them on the road, being spit on, open drug use and abuse on the bus, and then sweet stories like people who don't have a lot, really being appreciative of their day-to-day service and having these lovely interactions with people who could not benefit more or need public transit more. All right, I better zip the stories so we can make it through the intervention. So these are our 2 conceptual models, the steps to job success and the health success steering wheel. And so all the online training, goal setting, the themes of the challenges focus on these factors. These are Talia Bauer's factors that relate to job satisfaction and turnover. So convincing agencies to participate was in part if you invest this much, you may get this much return by keeping people, and it's actually the turnover cost that's probably the bigger motivator than the health savings, because that health savings is very indirect. So this is a screenshot on, it's not my phone, but it's copied onto a phone of what the website looks like on smartphone. This is the first challenge. They get an orientation of the program. Online, they're asked to do 2 online trainings on the health and job success factors. They'll set goals and they're asked to track them once a week with some simple reflective questions. And then they earn money every time they do something online, and they get feedback. And these are the feedback screens. The bus is how many in the group have done the training, the tracking, gets little check marks if people do it, and then they earn medals based on the percentage of stuff they did versus what we asked them to do. So a little game-like, nowhere near as sticky as trying to think of what my daughter's playing, Dragon Ball, or games that keep people's attention, don't necessarily do anything for your health, but it is meant to be game-like. So pilot is published. The trial is about mid-intervention in terms of data collection. Low work stress, we flip-flop, so it is in the direction desired if it's moving to the right. So stress reduced over time with experience, basically. This is a 12-month period in the pilot study, but it reduced more in the intervention group. Job satisfaction went in that positive way for intervention, not positive for control. Self-efficacy is job-related confidence, also similar. And social connection, I was kind of shocked it didn't improve more, because we're getting them physically together every 3 months. And I thought that would have a much bigger effect, but it didn't. And body weight outcomes, body weight was stable at the intervention site, but increased at the control site. We added the control site we seized an opportunity. We didn't originally plan it, but if we didn't, I don't know that I could interpret the intervention data very well without a control site that was trending in the other direction. So in the trial, we're seeing baby trends in the right direction at 6 months, but 12 months is our primary outcome time point. All right, so vehicle design and job design, I could probably spend another 30 minutes talking about, but I do think there are opportunities there in the spirit of Emily's questioning the status quo. I find myself, why can't we put a bathroom in the back of the bus for the operator? Because they all have trouble getting breaks and bathroom breaks and access to bathrooms. RVs have bathrooms. A bus is the same size as an RV. But for whatever reason, that's not happening. And I think with semi-autonomous features being added to trucks, there's an engineering opportunity to question how the vehicle is designed and maybe add features. Most of the companies said they would never buy the active suspension seat unless Freightliner or another manufacturer offered it as a package with a new vehicle, and they don't. So it's a no-go on the seat, even though it reduces whole body vibration by a lot, unless the manufacturer offers it to start with. And so I do think there's lots of opportunities with vehicle design if we're working with engineers and manufacturers. I've mentioned to Matt, I'm really, as a behavioral person, collaborating with sleep physiology people, I'm very much interested in the regularity of shifts, because variability and unpredictability seems to be a bad thing. And then Leslie Hammer, who I work with, there's quite a lot of evidence that having a supportive supervisor to work with you on your work life and is tremendous in reducing stress. We've even seen with truck drivers that having a supportive supervisor leads to long-term weight loss maintenance. And I was like, why would that happen? And I think it's like their stress bufferness. Like if you've lost weight, and then your job, you have an unsupportive supervisor, and your job is stressful, you're likely to backslide and fall out of your new habits. But if you have a supportive supervisor, any changes for health you're making are benefiting from a supervisor who's looking out for you, listening to you. I think that's where that comes from. So, and then these last 3 bullets are really kind of the aspiration is always to change working conditions, job design, supplement those with work as a social experience. We're social animals, we do work with people, we share work tasks with others. And so I really do think work isn't just your conditions. Jobs are designed by humans. We're doing this to ourselves. But I do think we need to supplement design and condition interventions with behavioral programs, and the larger effects seem to come from those combined efforts. But sometimes they're mixed. Like I said, it was kind of disappointing to run the stats on the randomized trial and see most of the effect sizes except for physical activity go. But that's part of being a scientist, what's working, what scales, what doesn't scale, all of those things. So sorry to be right up to time. I have plenty of time, but you all may have places to go. Happy to field a couple more questions. Lots and lots of people involved. So we'll just let their names sit up there for you to reflect on. I guess I should say special call out to Joseph Lotze. He's the engineer who introduced me to Pete. Yeah, so I'll stop and we can do a question or two.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit of time.
Yeah, so in working with both bus drivers and truck drivers, what are the most important kind of differences and risk factors you see between the two groups, or are they more or less similar?
Risk for fatality is way lower in transit. Risk for injury is maybe about the same, because traveling at highway speeds with a fully loaded truck versus slower city speeds. Stress exposures are very different. The bus operators like to say, my freight talks back to me. So they have very stressful interpersonal things to manage. And teams are their own unique kind of a thing. Circadian disruption is present for both. Solo truck drivers maybe can control their circadian, work in the day, sleep at night a little easier than teams or bus operators. There's a couple of differences. Yeah.
In the news you hear about shortages of drivers and that sort of thing. Has that shortage led to any improvements in the employment situation for any drivers, or is it really not changing anything, they just have a shortage?
My impression is that truck carriers have tried to move to more regional driving.
Yeah.
And true over-the-road driving, so you can maximize home time. You'll see it in recruitment messaging, home time, regular home time.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I remember being at a conference and a short-haul regional company had 1% turnover. Everyone else it was a panel discussion, everyone else had like super high turnover. And I was like, everybody should do what the 1% company's doing. And they all immediately ignored everything that person said, like predictable shift work, all this stuff, and said, how do you recruit? We can't recruit enough. It's like, I don't know, I think people are kind of stuck in
there's barriers to them doing that that they aren't willing to overcome. Even in this massive turnover and shortage situation, you'd think at some point they're gonna have to. But maybe
I don't know, there may be enlightened companies out there that are doing it, have lower turnover and everybody's happier, but
they're waiting for automation.
I'm not necessarily aware of them. You'd think they'd be out there.
Yeah. Interesting.
Time for one last question, possibly? Okay. Ryan, thank you so much, and we appreciate you being here.